Imagine driving through one of the world's most iconic cities, New York, only to encounter something that defies all logic and belief. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Brooklyn Bridge isn't just another urban legend. It's a chilling tale that challenges our understanding of reality. What if I told you that the line between the living and the dead isn't as clear as we think? What if your next ride home could be haunted by the echoes of a past tragedy? This story taps into our deepest fears and curiosities, blending the supernatural with the mundane in a way that will make you question what you believe to be real. Get ready to explore a mystery that promises a quick plunge into the unknown and a lingering sense of unease. But don't worry, we'll unravel this eerie tale together, offering you a glimpse into the shadowy corners of Brooklyn's history, where not all ghosts rest peacefully.
It all started with the sound of crunching metal and a blinding flash of light. The aftermath of the accident was a chaotic blur of twisted steel and shattered glass. My head throbbed with pain, and as I staggered out of the wreckage, the world around me seemed surreal. The cold night air filled my lungs, and I could hear distant sirens wailing through the city's silence. Yet, amidst the wreckage and confusion, there was an eerie stillness that settled over the scene, the kind that sends chills down your spine, as if the very air was whispering of something more sinister lurking just beyond the edges of reality. I glanced back at the bridge, its structure looming ominously in the night, the scene of my unexplainable encounter with the ghostly hitchhiker. The night had started like any other. I was driving through the dimly lit streets of New York, my taxi's headlights cutting through the thick fog that blanketed the city. The streets were unusually quiet, the usual buzz of the city replaced by an unsettling calm. As I approached the Brooklyn Bridge, a figure appeared in the distance, a man standing on the roadside, his thumb outstretched in the universal gesture for a lift. Something about his presence felt out of place. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and his face, pale and gaunt, seemed to reflect the surrounding darkness. Despite the eerie feeling gnawing at my gut, I pulled over and rolled down the window. His eyes met mine, and a chill ran down my spine, a sensation of cold that seemed to seep into my very soul. He climbed into the back seat without a word, the air inside the cab growing noticeably colder. The rearview mirror offered a glimpse of his unnerving, almost translucent appearance. The silence was suffocating, and as we drove, I found myself glancing at him through the mirror more than at the road ahead. He finally spoke, his voice a soft, hollow whisper, giving me an address in a part of town I knew well. His tone carried an otherworldly echo, like the fading memory of a voice long silenced. As we neared the address, I tried to make small talk, asking about his night and where he was headed. His responses were vague, almost as if he were avoiding the conversation entirely. The tension in the car was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. As we crossed the bridge, the fog seemed to thicken, enveloping the car in a ghostly shroud. The lights of the city blurred into indistinct glows, and I felt a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming cold emanate from the back seat, a chill that seemed to freeze the air itself. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I felt a heavy pressure settle in my chest. Glancing back, I was met with the sight of an empty seat. The hitchhiker had vanished. My heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Panic surged through me as I swerved the car to a halt, my hands trembling on the wheel. I turned fully, scanning the back seat, expecting to find some rational explanation, but there was nothing. The passenger was gone, leaving behind only a faint, lingering scent of old, musty air. I sat there, stunned and breathless, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the distant honking of a horn. I checked the doors, the windows, every possible exit, but everything was locked. There was no way he could have left without me noticing. My mind raced with questions, each more terrifying than the last. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? The more I tried to rationalize, the more my fear grew. The memory of his cold, hollow eyes was burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something otherworldly. Desperate for answers, I decided to drive to the address he had given me, hoping that there I would find some clarity or, at the very least, someone who could explain this bizarre encounter. Arriving at the address, a quaint brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, I felt a mix of fear and anticipation. The building loomed tall and shadowy, its windows dark and lifeless. As I approached the door, it creaked open before I could even knock. An elderly woman stood there, her expression one of quiet sorrow and resignation, as if she had been expecting me. I stumbled over my words, trying to explain the strange events of the night, describing the hitchhiker in detail. As I spoke, I noticed her eyes widen, a look of recognition and deep sadness crossing her face. She invited me in, her voice trembling as she asked me to describe the man once more. When I finished, she sighed deeply, her eyes welling with tears. She led me to a room lined with old photographs, pointing to one in particular. My heart nearly stopped as I recognized the hitchhiker's face, younger and happier in the faded picture. The woman explained that he was her son, a vibrant young man who had tragically passed away years ago. He had been in a car accident near the Brooklyn Bridge one cold, foggy night much like this one. She told me of the night he died, his car veering off the road in a deadly crash. He had been a kind soul, always offering rides to those in need, and now, it seemed, his spirit was trapped in an endless loop, replaying his final journey. The room grew colder as she spoke, and a sense of sorrow and loss filled the air. As she recounted the story, a chill settled in the room, and I felt the oppressive weight of the supernatural hanging heavily around us. It was as if his spirit was present, listening, watching. The woman showed me another photo, this time of the wrecked car, a haunting reminder of the night her son's life was tragically cut short. She explained that since his death, there had been countless reports of people seeing him on the bridge, always on nights like these. Her voice broke as she spoke of the countless attempts to contact him, to offer him peace, but his restless spirit seemed unable to move on. The realization that I had encountered a ghost, a real lost soul, was terrifying, but also profoundly sad. The woman's story added a layer of chilling reality to my experience, and I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pity for the lost spirit. I wanted to help, to somehow bring him peace, but how could I help someone who was already dead? As we talked, the shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, the atmosphere thick with the presence of the paranormal. The air felt charged, as if the very walls were steeped in his lingering sorrow. I asked her if there was anything I could do to help, but she shook her head, her eyes reflecting a deep, unending grief. She had come to terms with the fact that her son was trapped, unable to move on, and there was nothing she could do but wait and hope that someday he would find his way to the light. Leaving the house, I felt a deep sense of unease, as if the story wasn't over, as if the spirit still lingered around me. The fog had thickened even more, and the night seemed to stretch endlessly. As I got back into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at the rearview mirror out of habit, half expecting to see the ghostly figure once more, but it was empty. The city, usually so vibrant and alive, felt desolate and eerie, each streetlight casting long, haunting shadows. As I drove away, I felt a chilling sensation creep over me, like cold fingers trailing along my spine. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but the sense of the supernatural was too strong to ignore. Days passed, and I couldn't get the experience out of my head. The details of that night replayed over and over, each retelling sharpening the terror and mystery of it all. I began avoiding the Brooklyn Bridge, taking longer routes just to avoid the place where I had seen him. But despite my efforts, the nightmares came. Each night, I dreamt of the ghostly hitchhiker, his hollow eyes staring at me from the back seat, his cold presence chilling me to the bone. The dreams felt so real, so vivid, that I often woke up in a cold sweat, the feeling of his eyes still haunting me. I could hear whispers in the dark, faint and indistinct, like the echoes of voices long gone. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I started to fear that I was losing my grip on sanity. I tried to talk to friends about it, but they dismissed my story as a case of an overactive imagination or stress. It was frustrating, feeling the truth slipping away as others rationalized my experience into something mundane. Only one friend, Maria, took me seriously. She had always been fascinated by the supernatural and believed in the existence of spirits. When I told her my story, she listened intently, her expression serious. Maria suggested that I might have encountered a spirit who was trying to communicate something. She believed that ghosts often lingered because they had unfinished business or unresolved emotions. Her belief in my story was comforting, but it also terrified me. The idea that this ghost was trying to reach out to me, that I might somehow be connected to his haunting, was a chilling thought. Maria and I decided to investigate further, to find out more about the hitchhiker and the circumstances of his death. We combed through old newspapers, police reports, and any records we could find. The more we dug, the more unsettling the details became. We learned that on the night of his death, he had been driving home from a party, a fact that seemed mundane but somehow tragic in its normalcy. The police report mentioned that he had been found alone in the car, his body cold, with no signs of foul play. Yet, there was something eerie about the accident. Witnesses claimed to have seen him picking up hitchhikers on the bridge before the crash, but the police found no one else in the car or at the scene. The mystery deepened, and with it, my fear grew. As we pieced together the events leading up to the accident, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, it was just a vague unease, a prickling at the back of my neck. But then, strange things started happening. My apartment felt colder than usual, even in the height of summer. Lights flickered on and off, and electronic devices malfunctioned without reason. I would hear faint knocks on my door, but no one would be there. The sense of being observed grew stronger, almost oppressive, and I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. I knew it sounded crazy, but it felt like the hitchhiker's spirit was following me, trying to communicate. But what could he want from me? One night, as I lay in bed, half awake, I felt a sudden chill wash over me. The air grew cold, and the shadows in my room seemed to shift and move. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw him standing at the foot of my bed, the ghostly figure of the hitchhiker. He looked just as he had that night, pale and gaunt, with those hollow, piercing eyes. I couldn't move, paralyzed with fear, as he slowly raised his hand, pointing towards the window. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The terror I felt was indescribable, my skin crawling as if 1,000 cold fingers were touching me. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, leaving the room in an eerie silence. The only sound was my ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. After that night, I was consumed with fear and paranoia. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and my mind was constantly racing with thoughts of the hitchhiker and what he wanted. I started seeing him everywhere, in reflections, in shadows, even in crowds. It was as if he was haunting my every waking moment, a constant, terrifying presence. I felt myself spiraling, losing touch with reality. The line between the living and the dead blurred, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pulled into some dark, supernatural realm. Desperate for answers, I sought out psychics, priests, anyone who might help me understand what was happening. But nothing worked. The haunting continued, relentless and terrifying, as if the spirit was determined to torment me. One particularly cold and foggy night, I decided to confront the ghost. Armed with the knowledge Maria and I had gathered, I drove to the Brooklyn Bridge, the place where it all began. The bridge loomed ahead, shrouded in mist, the lights barely visible through the fog. I parked the car and walked to the spot where I had first seen the hitchhiker. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the silence. I called out into the darkness, asking the spirit to show itself, to tell me what it wanted. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and the distant rush of water. Then, I felt a cold breeze sweep past me, and he appeared again, standing just a few feet away. His eyes were filled with a deep sadness, and for the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy rather than fear. The ghostly figure stared at me, and in that moment, I understood. He wasn't trying to haunt me. He was seeking help, a way to move on from the limbo he was trapped in. I asked him what he needed, my voice trembling. The figure remained silent, but I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and regret wash over me. It was as if his emotions were being projected onto me, a deep, soul-crushing sadness. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I heard him speak. It wasn't a voice I could hear with my ears, but rather a feeling, a thought that echoed in my mind. He needed closure, a way to let go of the life he had lost. He was trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. I felt tears in my eyes, a mix of fear, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. Determined to help, I returned to the elderly woman's house the next day, telling her everything. She listened, her expression a mix of sadness and hope. We decided to hold a small ceremony, a way to say goodbye and offer peace to the lost soul. We gathered a few of his belongings, photos, and mementos, and took them to the bridge. As we stood there, the fog thick around us, we spoke words of farewell, expressing our wish for him to find peace and move on. The air felt charged, the atmosphere heavy with a sense of finality. I felt a cold breeze pass through me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a faint figure standing in the distance, watching. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving behind a profound silence. The days that followed were eerily calm. The strange occurrences stopped, and I no longer felt the cold, oppressive presence of the ghost. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and I could finally breathe freely again. The nightmares ceased, and the air in my apartment felt warm and welcoming. I knew that the spirit had found some semblance of peace, finally able to move on from the tragic circumstances of his death. The experience had left a mark on me, a deep awareness of the thin veil between our world and the next. It was a terrifying journey, but also one that filled me with a strange sense of gratitude. I had encountered something beyond explanation, something that defied the boundaries of life and death. As time passed, I often found myself thinking about the ghostly hitchhiker and the events that unfolded. It felt surreal, like a strange, distant dream, yet the memories were as vivid as ever. I continued my work, driving through the city, but I never forgot the lessons I had learned. The experience taught me about the fragility of life and the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. The story of the ghostly hitchhiker became a part of me, a chilling reminder of the supernatural forces that occasionally brush against our world. I shared the tale with close friends and family, always met with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. It was a story too strange to be true, yet too real to ignore. And so life went on. The city continued its relentless pace, the streets filled with the buzz of daily life. But every now and then, on a particularly foggy night, I would find myself avoiding the Brooklyn Bridge, a shiver running down my spine at the memory of those cold, hollow eyes. The ghostly encounter left an indelible mark, a story that lingered in the back of my mind, a haunting reminder of that terrifying night. I knew I would never forget the hitchhiker, the spirit trapped in a cycle of sorrow, searching for peace. It was a story that defied explanation, a glimpse into the unknown. And though the fear had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding, the memory of that night would forever be etched in my mind, a ghost story for the ages.
As you plan your next visit to New York City, take a moment to think about the stories that lie beneath its bustling streets and iconic landmark. The Brooklyn Bridge, a symbol of engineering marvel, may also be a gateway to the unknown. Have you ever wondered what really happened to the hitchhiker who vanished without a trace? The next time you find yourself crossing the bridge at night, will you dare to look into the shadows and listen for the whispers of the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in the supernatural? Or do you think there's always a rational explanation? And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next thrilling tale of terror. Until then, stay curious and stay safe, because you never know what might be lurking just out of sight.